old tugboat, its lights didn't work, and under further investigation it had a battery pack that was just completely rotted out. So my idea was to repurpose a old, way obsolete HO transformer that I've had for decades. Put out the DC required to run those little lights in that thing. It's all LEDs. And also maybe run these lights as well. Needed a cord. Where's the battery pack that was all rotted?
The battery pack that was all rotted?
Yeah.
Yeah, I tried to clean it out with contact spray. It didn't work at all.
So I just cut the cord and pigtail on it. That's variable over here. You can vary the volts with this little guy right here, and it's DC because it was for HO. You know, and that will be more than enough to run lights. Lots of lights. And then no need for batteries that corrode. And take this and stick it underneath the table. Wire them in. So that goofy little transformer has a new power cable because the other one was crumbling. And we pigtailed the cord to feed this little tugboat to see if it has lights. Look at that. You don't even have to give it very much at all. So the same power supply being DC, and you can control somewhat how much voltage it puts out. You can also take care of things like these street lights, anything that has batteries. Picked up this guy right here from Radio Shack. Didn't realize they still were in business, but apparently one of the local hardware stores has the franchise, and they have a display with some stuff. And I remember when I was a kid, my dad had a Win brand gun like this, and it was really, really cool because it would heat up fast. And the beauty about it was you could put enough heat on a joint fast enough where you melt just the joint, just a solder right there, without it heat soaking back into the rest of the device. So even though it had a lot more power, it was actually easier to do, you know, the stuff that required some finesse. And today I'm going to put it together, and I have one little joint to solder here on this old transformer. Put a different circuit breaker in there. And the interesting thing is the way these are laid out is all things from the transformer eventually have to go through these common poles, but they actually go to circuit breaker then to ground. So without that completed circuit, nothing works within the transformer. Concept being, if there's a short circuit anywhere, it circuit breaks at the ground. Of course, the ground goes to common on the plug. I don't know if that makes sense, but it's really simple and really cool. Mine died, so we're going to put a different one on there and see if it works, and we're going to try out this soldering gun and see if that makes sense. Also going to LEDs for all the lights. I think that ought to be an advantage because they don't make as much heat. But let's start out with trying to put this together. Just like that. So a little nuance on these old transformers. I believe this is an old LW. Is if you want to replace the light in here, it's a little bit ass backwards. You know, your clue is the little wire that goes to the center pole, the light comes to this common pole right here on the transformer. We put it down here, but it really goes to this one right here, which is ground. So that's your ground, not your feed. So you got to ask yourself, where does it get fed from? It gets fed from that. So right now it's got 2.2 residual volts, just like just like this guy right here, and you turn your handle, that guy is the variable voltage pole. It goes to 19.82 volts, 19.82 volts. Look at that. Guess what? So does this thing right here. You wind it back, goes back to 2 volts. So when you're thinking about putting a little light bulb in there and you have a little spring to hold it up against the little bayonets, you got to isolate that from here, otherwise it's just going to dead short right to ground. Kind of an oddball scenario, huh? I'm almost afraid to try it. So Mary put a little piece of insulation underneath the spring to hold up that. This is an LED. So we have a solution here. Look at that. And the key, which probably stumped me as a kid, was having it fed ass backwards. So this is so cool. I think we have a transformer. It has an LED, so it's not going to get hot and melt that. Little piece of insulation underneath the spring that holds up that little lighting button. Now this transformer right here, this thing puts out 125 watts continuous. At least it's rated for that. That's actually more than some of the expensive transformers. And so let me see what we have for voltage. So I don't know if that shows up in the camera. There's 19.8 volts down to 2.2. I guess the LED needs at least 8 volts to fire off based on what this is saying. I think it starts out at 8 volts. It looks like the transformer jumps from a residual 2 volts immediately to 8 volts at the low setting and goes up to 19 volts. Isn't that cool? So now we have a working transformer we just have to put together. And that was partly because of this monster right here. Look at this thing. Now, remember, all this is all AC. This is your household 60 hertz, 110 or 115 volts transformed down to 19 volts, right? So it's icy outside, so my hilltop saw shop type activities have to get put on the back burner. I'll put a little more time on these old 1960s, 70s, and I guess now 1980s model trains. One of the things that kind of crossed my mind is now I have a little bit of time with the new stuff, or newer stuff, in the sense that got one of those Mike Wolf design trains, you know, the MTHs. And the one thing that is a takeaway is where when I was a kid, you know, you sort of had this tactile feel that you got with the transformer. Turn the dial, thing goes faster. Turn the dial back, it goes slower. And there was sort of a direct connection between you and the train. And that's what I grew up with. And Lionel had come up with a fairly reliable system for young kids to, well, adults too, I guess, to really enjoy these things. And yeah, I mean, it was part modeling and part trying to be prototypical and all that, but also a lot of it was just enjoying the mechanics of this stuff, the physics of it, learning about traction and power and a little bit of electricity and all that. What we have here is one of the lower end Alcos 200 series that was made from the 50s into the 60s. And then this is a MPC, which is Lionel's foray into cost savings after they had gone through some troubles. And both of them have some of the same tooling for the plastic shells, but the drive systems are a little bit different. But I have fun with them. They're not all that sophisticated. They're kind of simple. The old one has magnet traction, which works really good on that steel tube track. The new one's got those little rubber traction wheels. Neither one of them can pull more than 10 cars, but when I put two of them together, I can pull quite a bit. They're fun. And these big old transformers are fairly inexpensive, but the whole vintage Lionel thing can be extremely expensive or can be relatively cheap. I find this stuff fairly inexpensively. Found a shop up here, an amazing place. I'll throw a little video in there. But like that was like $100, and the cars are like 10 bucks a piece used. And they're from my era when I was a kid, so I got this one, this one, this one, and those two longer Lehigh Valley coal hoppers, and they're like 10-15 bucks a pop. So you can get into the old stuff for fairly inexpensive if you know where to look. Now, like I said, I mean, my era was post-war Lionel. I've got 10 plate from pre-war, but from the 1940s, 50s into the 60s, that was what I was running, that era of Lionel products. Lionel Trains, you know. And because I had 027 with a 27-inch radius, I was pretty much constrained to using the smaller locomotives. You know, like those Alcos were 027s, really. They weren't O gauge. Now this is an O gauge layout, everybody knows that. And the one thing I think has improved versus the old stuff is the track. The fast track is pretty cool. I can see that. And then Real Track from MTH is really nice. You know, and there's some other brands out there as well. I'm pretty new to this. But I'm still struggling with this because the new trains, what they've done is instead of me varying the voltage at the transformer to make them go faster and slower, you know, starting at nothing, adding say 10 volts, and then me actually varying the voltage at the transformer. The new ones, what they do is they have a fairly sophisticated power supply, kind of like you'd have for your computer or a hair dryer. You know what I'm saying? And they put a constant 18 or 20 volts to the track, which is delivered to the locomotives or the devices, and then they have a CPU in between that 18 and 20 volt feed from the track to the devices like the motors, the bells, and the whistles and stuff like that. And they have a communication protocol that they use to track as a medium to send that, to tell that locomotive how to distribute the power, whether it's making it go forwards or backwards or a bell or a whistle. And this device right here allows you to communicate with the locomotive through the track with a handheld device. This is one of the early Rail King infrared devices. And yeah, I can see the attraction of that, but somehow pushing a button for me, or takes away the tactile feel of turning a dial. So while I think it's cool and they're more prototypical, I think I still have more fun with the stuff that I grew up with. Just a humble opinion. Now we're going to explore that more. And the other thing we're going to do, just because I can't help myself, is see if I can find a dial system to sort of bring it back to that same kind of a feel of the older ones. And if I can't do that, well, we're going to hack one. I know that's really, really sacrilegious in the modeling community, but geez, I remember when it was about hacking and building things. But the new ones are really cool. I mean, there's no doubt, especially they've crossed into the cyber world and communications world. So you can teach kids all about that along with the physics. So there's a lot of advantages. I can see it. But for me, the fun was as much the driving as it was the building and modeling. So to each his own. I think I'm going to retro back into the old ones and have fun hacking a couple of those old Alcos because they're cheap and there's a lot of them around, and trying to find the right bodies for the railroads I was interested in, like New York Central probably, or New Haven, or things like that, railroad names that I grew up with. And we'll add some MTH or some Lionel new ones to the roster over time and decide where I want to go with those. I mean, they're really nice. They're really sophisticated. I love the drive systems they have. It reminds me of the high-end HO back when I was a kid, where you had the big flywheel motors and stuff like that that made them start smooth and run smooth, and added weight to them. They could pull more. That one there's got both trucks driven, where these old ones right here, you only have the rear trucks driven, and that's just one motor here, and that's a dummy. But we're going to change that. I think I'm going to hack those and see if we can add stuff to them. And I think that's part of the theme, is make it fun again. Had to bring the switch controller wires over to the switches. Now those telephone poles have a purpose. Now one of the things that happens also is because these guys run a constant 18 volts to the track, things like the switches. Check this out. Right now there's 0 volts because I have nothing going to the track to run the train, but now I want to run the train. Now it starts powering the switch. So you actually have to have track voltage for those switches to work, right? Where on the old Lionel stuff, they have a port right there in the side where you can add a plug to put your voltage there, so even while the train is off, those switches are powered up. Because I've added 18 volts to the switch using one of these constant voltage poles in the transformer. This one here is variable voltage, that one's variable AC voltage. These two are steady state, fixed 14 and 18 volts, right? So these can be used to run those switches. So I think I'm also going to change the name of the channel. I'm trying to figure out what best to do that. Because the original channel was, I called it a Fleet Command. And then the one we have here is a Fleet Command Fishing for Fun. And, well, Fleet Command's dead. So I think we're going to change it to something along the lines of Hilltop Saw Shop, Trains and Boats, or something like that. But I'll throw it out there. So let's test the concept we had yesterday using HO power to power lights instead of batteries. So we got that transformer going, powering that little boat. And let's see whether or not this transformer works. We put that light in there.